Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name's David. I'm the chair of the OCBS. And tonight we are very lucky to have with us Ben Shapps and Sophie Marcon, who are going to be doing a fantastic talk. In a moment, I'll hand you over to both of them. But before we continue, just a few of the minor rules around housekeeping. So the audience can't see one another, but we are joined by a wide range of people this evening. We have Old Cholmondeleyans, members of the Highgate pupil body, and students from some of Highgate's partner schools. And everyone's raring to hear about the future of UK business. So, and who better to listen to than, as I said, our guests, Ben Shapps, along with our host, Sophie Marcon. I'm absolutely delighted to have you with us this evening. We'll be hearing from Ben and Sophie about their careers, followed by some questions for Ben about the state of UK business, and then we'll be taking questions from the audience. If you do have a question, please make sure to put it in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer as many as we can when we get to that point later on. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Sophie.
Hi, everyone. So I'll come clean. I'm actually an aspiring barrister. I'm currently at bar school doing my training, and I left behind the world of parliamentary politics around the time the pandemic started. I worked as a parliamentary researcher and assistant in the House of Lords for a member of the Lords Spiritual, and I then worked in the House of Commons for a shadow minister in a similar kind of role. But Stuart asked me as an OC if I would be tempted to hone or practice my advocacy skills by examining Ben on trade policy. But as we're both OCs, I will go steady and be kind. As it's already been highlighted by David, we've got lots of people here who are interested in politics, finance, law. So we'll try and cover lots of these areas this evening. We'll keep it open. And as David mentioned, please do put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll try and answer them at the end of the session. So beginning with a question for Ben, briefly, can you give us a synopsis of your career so far?
Thanks, Sophie. And yeah, thanks to Stuart and Highgate for inviting me along. It's good to be back in touch with the Highgate community. So yeah, since leaving Highgate in 2008 and finishing university in 2013, really, I've done quite a range of things over the last 8 years, but I'll keep it pretty short and snappy. Essentially, I started off straight after uni on a policy graduate scheme for the Confederation of British Industry, which is basically the representative body for UK business. And it's essentially a lobbying organisation representing the views of business to government, which was a really good exposure to a range of policy areas and roles, which I did over the course of 3.5 years. And my last role actually was focusing on trade and investment and how businesses could be supported to export. So yeah, that was my first sort of proper job. And then I moved across to the City of London Corporation, which is the governing body or local government for the square mile. So yeah, the heart of the sort of financial and professional services sector in London. And my main role there was supporting the Lord Mayor of London on his overseas trade missions, so recruiting businesses to go to different overseas markets. And yeah, that's the Lord Mayor, the person who sort of dresses up in funny robes rather than Sadiq Khan, which is often confused. But yeah, I did 2 years there, and then I entered the civil service. Just through applying for an external vacancy that was advertised, a particular role, which was at DCMS, so the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. And my main role there was to lead on the government's engagement with the cybersecurity sector, helping companies in that innovative sector to grow and invest more in the UK. So yeah, I've actually only been in my latest Department for International Trade now for about 6 months, but I'm a senior policy manager working on the Board of Trade team, and the Board of Trade is essentially an external business advisory body to the Secretary of State for International Trade. So we write reports on different different issues and do visits for the Secretary of State around the country. But been doing that for the last 6 months, really enjoying it, and yeah, happy to be here. But I'm slightly worried about the grilling now.
It sounds really interesting, everything that you've done, and only since 2013. That's fantastic. I will start with a bit of a difficult question, if you don't mind. So we all know, obviously, that there has been a global impact of this pandemic. And in this country, at least, we've got that combined, well, I suppose also in Europe, combined with the uncertainty surrounding Brexit. And those two combined have essentially contributed to increased volatility in UK trades in goods since 2020, and obviously clearly into 2021 as well. So in finding sort of solutions to these problems, what have your discussions broadly centered upon?
Yeah, it's a good one to kick off. So yeah, as you say, yeah, two enormous challenges, coming in parallel is sort of a unique situation for British business in the country to be in. I mean, to start on focusing on the pandemic side of things, the priority of my department, DIT, but also government more broadly, in terms of securing, international trade and the flow of goods, etc., is about supporting, the businesses and people who are producing those goods, the businesses themselves, those who manufacture and export them, as well as the secondary point is supporting, the supply chains that they depend on. And in terms of the business support, it's really been a focus on ramping up business support schemes, whether that's loans or financing facilities, tax cuts, VAT cuts, things like that. And obviously we all know about the furlough scheme, which, has arguably kept a lot of businesses going, a lot of people employed. So that's the sort of fundamental point, I suppose, business interruption loans, furlough, things like that. But then we also look more specifically at supply chains too. So there was a scheme launched about a year ago by DIT, but other departments as well, called the Vulnerable Supply Chain Facility, which basically protects and helps finance vulnerable supply chains across the developing world, upon which, as we've all come to learn, big UK high street brands really depend on for the supply of food and other critical things. So providing the money and finance where that's needed. And also just another point on exporters. I mean, this is something that was going on before Brexit and the pandemic, but the government tries to act as a safety net in terms of ensuring potential exporters and exports. So they like to say that, they don't want any potentially viable export to fail if there's demand for it. So government sort of being that safety net. And on Brexit, it's an even broader question, I guess. I think one key thing for us at the Department for International Trade is negotiating new free trade agreements, and also rolling over the existing ones that we had by being a member of the EU, and that's all going pretty quickly. But in terms of new FTAs, it's about kind of opening up new potential markets for UK businesses, but also that improves the resilience and diversity of supply chains as well. So it is an exciting time in that sense to have new FTAs negotiated. And it's easy to forget, but the Department for International Trade is only 5 years old. It was created post the referendum, so it's had to establish itself pretty quickly, get in trade negotiators and others. So yeah, things like ongoing US negotiations and the agreement with the Pacific area as well present huge opportunities. But clearly there are problems to work through, and we've all seen the news about the Northern Ireland Protocol and trade with Ireland and Northern Ireland and the UK. So yeah, there's a lot that's been done, but a lot still to do, really.
Yes, definitely. On to another similarly difficult question, I think. We've been hearing a lot recently, to be honest, when have we not been hearing about labour shortages, certainly since Brexit, arguably brought about by Brexit, and about how this has essentially resulted in a sort of restricted supply of goods to UK customers, and some of us are seeing this firsthand. Are you worried, given this, that businesses won't be able to focus on their export targets?
Yeah, no, it's a good point to raise the labour shortages. And yeah, a few years ago, none of us would have guessed that that this might be the issue. You're right that it's a very complicated issue with the shortage of HGV drivers, and Brexit is certainly a factor, but there are also a number of other factors. So the pandemic has stopped, or for a long time stopped, the training of new drivers, the recruitment of new drivers, and they weren't able to get qualified or do their tests. So that's part of a reason for the shortfall, but also just an aging workforce. And these problems, I think we've seen as well in the US and Europe, and obviously read about it in the news a lot over the last few months. I'm hoping that, I mean, it's a bit outside of my department, some of this, but I hope that some of the government measures about reintroducing more training and fast tracking kind of qualification of drivers, but also some of the temporary relief on immigration controls to try and get about 5,000 HGV drivers back into the country, at least on a short-term basis to fill the gap. But clearly these are kind of only short-term solutions, and hopefully there'll be a longer term one found to sort of have a steady pipeline of talent. And yeah, of course, it's a concern for exporting businesses and supply chains with all of these delays caused by this labour shortage. DIT do a number of things, Department for International Trade. But to address partly this concern, we launched last week an export support service, which is basically a 24-hour hotline, but also online contact center where businesses can raise any kind of practical issues they're having with exporting to Europe, but eventually in time further afield as well. But actually going back to like the export insurance point as well, it's why it's particularly important to have measures like that in place, just to make sure the SMEs don't suffer disproportionately.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think talking further on labour shortages, I think it's important that we shed light on labour shortages, I suppose, all over, from HGV drivers to people effectively helping to run the government in the civil service, and I suppose legal as well, who help them on another aspect of their work. So with regard to those shortages, do you think that the civil service or the lawyers will be affected by a potential shortage of entrants? I mean, both can be quite challenging careers to enter anyway. But what do you think, certainly on the civil service side?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, speaking to the civil service point, I can definitely do, and I'd be interested in any thoughts from you, not to switch this around too much, but on the legal side, I don't know about that. But at least anecdotally with the civil service, I've heard that there is still a really high volume of applications to the civil service fast stream, a crazy number. So I think over 30,000 applications each year for that scheme, and it only takes just over 1,000 people a year. So it's very oversubscribed. I think also there was a concern after Brexit about what would happen to EU nationals, because a lot of my colleagues have been EU nationals and they bring a huge amount to the civil service. And there was initial concern, but I did notice the way the civil service really helped those individuals, advised them, and in the end, all the individuals, at least that I heard of, they applied and successfully got settled status within the UK, so they were able to stay and work. But I think it's also important that the civil service kind of remains open to recruiting at different levels as well. So actually my younger sister joined as an apprentice within the civil service, and they have a big apprenticeship scheme. They also recruit on an ad hoc basis, like they advertise roles externally. That's kind of how I entered. So I think, yeah, it's crucial for them to keep going that way. But over the last few years, the size of the civil service has grown. I mean, for example, my department was created, all the new trade negotiators. I think it's a scary number. I think there are about 450,000, like plus, if you look at the whole machinery. My department's only a few thousand, but there are some really huge entities. But yeah, I mean, I think it is still an attractive kind of career for people overall. You know, you get to work on a range of really interesting issues that affect people's lives. And there's a huge variety of opportunities across the civil service doing all sorts of different roles. So not just policy, but, you know, trade promotion, kind of every job you could think of, legal as well, both in the UK and overseas. But yeah, not to push it back too much on you, but do you think there's an issue with the legal sector as well, potentially?
I think similar to the civil service, the legal profession has no shortage of people aspiring to join it, and I suspect that won't change. I think the point to make instead is actually the loss of some wonderful opportunities, I suppose, that arise from cross-jurisdictional practitioners, or people who are perhaps academics or otherwise, who were able to move freely and to teach about how different legal issues, different legal problems are solved in different jurisdictions. Of course, there's a whole bigger question about the influence of the EU and some of the wonderfully successful laws that have been created by the EU, very humane laws, and the loss of what will that will mean to the legal profession and this country generally. But I think in essence the answer is no, I don't think there will be a shortage of entrants, but I think we will lose out on a lot of the wonderful things that we did gain from having legal practitioners from other jurisdictions visiting this country freely and working here. I'll ask you another question then, if that's okay. So on to export growth. Which countries do you see the largest potential for export growth with then?
Yeah, I think probably I mentioned it briefly earlier, this new free trade area that the UK is trying to become a member of. The acronym's long, it's TPP, but essentially like the Pacific Rim countries, including a lot of big markets like Japan and Vietnam. I think the Southeast Asia, East Asia is where the largest potential growth is. And I say that because, as I think we all know, you know, the US and EU markets are the largest by volume currently for our exports, but they're already pretty well established. So perhaps less room for huge growth. Although, yeah, we're the largest overseas investor in the US, which often surprises people. But this Trans-Pacific area is about £9 trillion worth. If you look at all of the economies and the potential there. So joining that would be a huge potential. And I guess if you look at a country like Vietnam as a case study, hugely fast-growing country with a growing middle class, as with a lot of these Southeast Asian markets. And it's sort of a happy coincidence, I think, that growing middle class fits the sort of special, the strengths of the UK. You know, high-end goods, luxury goods like Scotch whiskey are in high demand in these markets. but also services like insurance. When a society sort of gets wealthier, they start to look for products like that. And obviously, we're a real leader in financial and professional services. So, yeah, I think generally that area has a huge amount of potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think to build on that, there's the question really of how businesses have had to adapt to new trade laws. Certainly, those working within the law and on the withdrawal agreement have had to explore how EU law fits into UK law. I mean, that was the entire point really of the withdrawal agreement. So how have businesses had to adapt to new trade laws, and what challenges do you think remain?
So yeah, it's a good question. It's really hard to give a sort of general answer to that. It so much depends, at least just on my anecdotal experience, because I have less legal expertise than you, but talking to businesses of a variety of sizes from a variety of sectors, it really depends where they're coming from, if that makes sense. So to give an example, a large multinational financial services firm would struggle less to make sure they've got a small office in the EU to meet the reporting requirements and things like that, and they'd be able to keep trading largely as they were before the Brexit referendum. But requests like that or hurdles like that are obviously a lot harder for smaller businesses to jump through. And I think, as a lot of our discussion is focused on, those exporting goods with additional checks on the border, with these sort of so-called just-in-time supply chains, it can be really disruptive. So I think we're still, obviously there was a transition period for this purpose, but I think we're still as an economy adapting to the new regulations, new way of doing things, and inevitably there will be continued discussions about how to make sort of that comprehensive free trade agreement between the UK and EU work better. And as I said before, I think we all know when we're ordering goods like from Europe and we can see the delays coming on our Amazon products, or delivering stuff to Northern Ireland and Ireland, there are a lot of things that hopefully with modern technology and things like digital borders, that we can accelerate the flow of trade. But yeah, it so depends on the sector. So whether you're a services company as well, sometimes that they're affected by different things like GDPR and what the data sharing of data rules are and things like that across the EU. So yeah, I mean, that's the, I suppose, that the slightly negative spin. Hopefully, as I say, the UK will continue to sign more free trade agreements, improve the sort of way that trade works with the EU, and open up more opportunities for some UK businesses. But what I've been amazed by, I think, throughout my career so far, is how pragmatic and quick to adapt to change, or adaptable businesses are. As long as they know the rules, they can very quickly adapt and do things differently. It's just the worst point, I think, was when there was that uncertainty, and you mentioned like the withdrawal agreement. It was the sort of few years of the back and forth and not knowing what the arrangements were going to be, and then businesses at the very last minute had to make final arrangements. So yeah, it's still a bit of a moving feast, but I think businesses are adapting well.
That's good to hear. I'll stop questioning you now, and I think we can take some questions from the audience. We have a real variety actually in the Q&A box. I don't know whether we've got things ranging from careers to big conceptual social questions. I don't know whether you want to pick, or whether I should just run through.
I'll trust you, but they've been good questions so far.
Okay, well let's start with the first one in the box, the careers one, because I think it's important to be aware that a lot of people who are probably listening to this are, thinking about their careers and thinking about the foundations that they need to lay to get into the jobs they would like to get into, and fingers crossed they do, and that those jobs exist for them. So the first question then says, I enjoy economics A-level and I want to do economics for university, but I'm not sure what the best route after university is. It's a big question. Can you advise?
So I guess specifically, if I'm answering that from the civil service perspective, as I mentioned before, there are so many different types of role in the civil service. So as an economist, you could there is I believe there is an economist fast stream where you can rotate, as with the generalist fast stream, around departments as an economist or an analyst, and lots of people do that and really like it. But also there are lots of civil servants. They come from all sorts of academic backgrounds, and the exact area of focus often doesn't matter if you end up wanting to be a generalist civil service servant moving around different departments and roles. But I think it's clearly a very good grounding, and there's certainly always a demand for people with those skills. So I guess what I would say generally as well on the civil service front is just to remember that there's more than one entry point. So I think everyone hears about the civil service fast stream, and that's what I heard about. And frankly, I applied for it, didn't get in, didn't get through some of the maybe I shouldn't be mentioning that, but didn't get through some of like the online tests. I mean, as I say, there are about 30,000 applicants, 1,000 places or so. It's also an element of luck. I think, frankly, there are many people that don't get in that would make, good civil servants. But there is that option, the economist fast stream, but also, there's the apprenticeship level, and there are roles that are often advertised externally. So you could, you could go into like any private sector job, and then if you wanted, I don't know if you fancied doing like policy or improving your work-life balance or anything, civil service does have a good work-life balance. You can apply for a role and then enter the civil service that way.
Thanks. I'd add to that you don't need to know while you're doing your A-levels what the best route after university is as well. It took me a long time, frankly, after finishing university, really to work out what I wanted to do, and there is no best route. There are obviously better and worse routes, and I'm sure you have the good judgment to make that call, but please don't feel pressure now to know what your job needs to be. And the next one is almost philosophical, but I think there is an intended answer here, which is, will we ever find more trade than the trade we left behind in the EU?
Well, yeah, I guess it's maybe a little bit philosophical, but yeah, no, it's a fair question. And I guess the question is basically like, long-term impact of Brexit. So I guess if I'm hopeful that if trade with the EU, is smoothed and particularly our services sector. So our services sector represents 80% of our economy and is growing fast. So if that sector keeps growing and those companies are still able to trade with the EU, digital companies, financial and professional services, I believe the volume of trade with the EU can increase. Whether or not it will be more straightforward than having just remained a member of the EU and traded with the EU, certainly, I wouldn't say that's the case perhaps for a while. I think understandably, the EU were sort of keen to show that, there is benefits to the membership, and a lot of that would be, admin and bureaucracy of trading, as opposed to just being with a single block. So I think the volume of trade will get there and surpass previous levels, but it's all about just the sort of ease of doing business there, and that's what government, I guess, is there to do, to try and support businesses who basically have more paperwork to deal with now than before.
So the next question is a sort of double question, but I'll read it. So it says, traditionally, governments have given tax incentives to try and get foreign brands to locate themselves in the UK. What other methods are used to support business in the UK? And how do you avoid the unintended consequences of government intervention in the private market?
So, yeah, I mean, I guess answering that in reverse, it's always a really sensitive area, how much of a role government should play. And that's why some of the work government's done around an industrial strategy, you know, has at times been accused of picking winners, so-called, so picking the types of companies it wants to succeed, like future sectors for the economy, and then giving them extra funding or support. So I think, government's very conscious not to give any sort of disproportionate advantage to one firm or one sector over another. And as you'll know, Sophie, things like so-called state aid, there are, when we were part of the EU, there were state aid limits about the amount of support that government could provide to a particular business, and those are, have and are being adapted for the UK, but it's something that's constantly, the due diligence is done on that more and more now. It's an interesting question on tax incentives for foreign brands. I mean, probably one of the three key things my department does is trying to attract big inward investment to the UK. And it often is a competition between us and, the company is debating which market it will go to. It is often a competition with those other markets about, I would say, not just like offering, tax incentives and monetary incentives, because if it's a large company and it's going to invest in a country for 30 years or something or more, there's a chunk of money, but actually they'll be looking at far broader questions like the labor market, which is an issue we've discussed, or whether they've got available skills and government policy and the general business environment. So it is part of it, and on a case-by-case basis, work is done to like go above and beyond to attract companies. But broadly, I think the approach is about just making the UK business environment as friendly as possible. So, competitive tax regime being one of many things that's considered.
So the next question, I'm not sure if I'd be able to answer this, is what is the UK's biggest export, obviously other than hilarious comedy, but
yeah, that's a really good question. If you were to ask me about Scotland specifically, it'd be Scotch whisky, that's the easy one, and it's the example that's always used. I think as the UK, as I mentioned, like we're mostly a services economy. If I can be broad enough to say financial services, that is, I think really we are a global leader in that area, renowned for that. London as a hub, with the London Stock Exchange and where a lot of the clearing was done, and that huge hub around the square mile. I think that is one of the things we're really known for, and a huge export. But I mean, we're privileged that so many British brands are just really famous and renowned around the world. So I mentioned like Vietnam and demand for sort of higher end goods. I could have mentioned fashion brands and our entertainment industry. The Bond film will be doing well across the whole world. So it have so many iconic brands, and Department for International Trade tries to leverage that by I'm sure you'll all have seen like the GREAT campaign, Britain is Great campaign, and it talks about our world leading universities and all sorts of sectors where we lead in, like entertainment as well. So it is hard to pick, but possibly by value, it's on the financial services side.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the last question that we've got in the box is, it's wonderfully social sciencey. It makes me very excited. Do you think that the lack of immigration post-Brexit will lead to fewer interactions and therefore lower productivity in cities? How will this impact the future of cities?
Okay, I'm scribbling furiously to try and remember those points. Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't have the exact sort of numbers on immigration. I know I mentioned before that the settled status scheme, and hopefully that at least kept a lot of existing EU talent in the country. But clearly, immigration for like a really international economy like ours is crucial to fill not. I think the stereotype is often that it's like lower value jobs, so-called like fruit pickers or factory jobs, but it's across all levels. You see so much talent, like international talent, in the city, civil service, I'm sure the legal profession as well. So we really need access to that. And yeah, if we can't keep attracting that talent, then our productivity will suffer. And actually, relatively speaking, I think to other G7 economies, our productivity is a bit of a concern. And I think attracting talent and is important. And I think we've maybe only gone part of the way. I think it is really hard to get into the country if you're not. It's a bit easier for EU citizens, but beyond that and beyond the Commonwealth, if you're a talented entrepreneur wanting to come to the UK to set up your business, it is still quite hard. You have to prove that you're, exceptionally talented and have a great idea, and that you essentially have to prove that no one else in the country can do that job better than you, which I think for any of us would be quite hard to prove. So, I hope that we can find a way to have like as welcoming an immigration policy as possible, really. But alas, that one's a bit out of my hands.
Another question just popped up, and I think it's a very interesting one. I mean, I don't know how much interaction you've had with the Department for Education. I briefly did in my first parliamentary job, but the question says, in the UK, maths performance in schools has worsened. This will then go on to affect the competitiveness of the UK labour market. How does the Trade Department work with other departments in order to tackle this, as well as the decline in UK productivity?
Gosh.
Huge question, but very good one.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, well, we work, I guess on the latter part of the question, we work closely with the Department of Education on promoting so-called education exports. So helping schools and universities open international campuses, helping them attract international talent and investment. There's a whole industry around edtech, technology and education. So certainly work a lot with the department in that sense as a sort of, business sector in its own right. And one that I said before, world-renowned sector of ours. The maths point, I guess I might take slightly separately. Yeah, I'm aware, just probably as we all are, that our maths scores relative to a lot of economies, particularly in Asia, are lower. And, I think clearly improving kind of numeric literacy would be a benefit for productivity and our economy. So it might be sort of, the culture around sort of maths or the way it's taught at an early stage, I can't say for sure, but yeah, I think investment is going into that area, and we're certainly working closely with Department for Education on promoting the UK's education sector. But yeah, maths is a very tough one. I don't know if Sophie, how we fix the maths problem in the UK.
No, unfortunately I don't. The last time I did formal maths in formal education really was at GCSE. It is problematic. I think it's interesting that you mentioned the cultural aspect to that. I think there is probably I say issue feels like a very strong word, but there is a strange relationship that we as a country have with education. I think we feel often that it is something that is done to us as opposed to done for us. We were both extremely lucky to go to schools where it was totally done for us, and I had a wonderful time at Highgate, and I fully engaged with all the opportunities that were offered, but plenty of people don't have that experience at school. So I think improving performance across the board, whether maths or otherwise, will be something to do with changing the way that education is viewed, and perhaps changing how education works. Things are very different from I said the world is very different from when our parents went to school, yet our parents still took A-levels. They took A-levels, we took A-levels, and there was like a 30-year difference between us, and the world had come so far in that gap. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents. I'm sorry, it's not really an answer to the question, but I think we do need some kind of education sort of revolution, really, and it's something
skill. Yeah, I mean, if you can bring maths and economics to your CV when you start applying for jobs, you'll be in very good stead, basically.
Absolutely. I think so. Just, I mean, on that point about going back to really the foundations and education, and how you start a career in either of the sectors that we have worked in. I know you touched on this briefly with the first question that you answered, but what advice would you give to someone who wanted to explore a career in any of the things that you've done?
I think the key thing is being open-minded to it, and I think Sophie, you referenced this as well. Like, you don't necessarily have to know exactly what you want to do at A level, but know the rough areas you're interested in. For me, I just got more and more interested in government and how society was run and policy was made. So that led me to where I am now. But there isn't just one route ever. So for me, I did a number of different roles before ending up in the civil service, and I'm grateful that I had time outside the civil service, in private sector and local government to learn a bit more about how the world outside of the civil service works. So be open-minded. I don't think, for a lot of roles you need a specific background. It's just about kind of cross-cutting skills and so-called soft skills, just being able to interact with people, leadership skills, working in team. And, Highgate's a fantastic school and will set you up well for that, as well as university.
We've had a couple more questions actually enter the box. So shall I run through those? So the first one is, will COVID cause a permanent long-term change in the world of work, i.e. people keeping on working from home post-lockdown? Do you think this will contribute to urban areas being unable to attract workers? It's a very interesting question. I think particularly pertains to places like London and Manchester. And
yeah. So I think we're running out of time, but I think, we've got time for this one. I mean, as I've found, I've been working from home for 18 months or so now, slowly going back into the office, which is great. I think a lot of people, particularly those at an early stage of their careers, want to do it because it is all about networking and meeting people and learning from the people you're around. But there are a lot of people as well who have a long commute into the office, like the working from home lifestyle. So there is that dilemma. Interestingly, I know someone from university who's setting up a company to sort of bridge the gap in a way. It's almost like creating a WeWork, but for sort of local commuter towns, so that people can go into something that feels like an office without having to travel an hour and a half to get into London. So I think the way work works will change a bit, but there are certainly those like me who really value being in an office around people as well.
I think that's a really great question to close on. I'm sorry we haven't managed to cover all of them, but thank you all for listening and for submitting your great questions.
Thank you both. I think I'm the only person between everyone and a drink or food or whatever it is. you're partaking of tonight. But thanks very much, both of you, on behalf of the OC Society. It was fascinating, and some really, really emotive, I suppose, and difficult questions there, I think, as well. And so thank you both for doing it with such aplomb. It's not easy, obviously, to answer questions coldly like that as well and give us so much information. But you both had good grounding, didn't you? I mean, I know, so for you, a lot of Masaryk Society meetings, which can get quite heated, can't they, at school, the Politics Society there. And I think Ben was one of the few people I knew who'd happily volunteer for a steeplechase every Saturday afternoon or something. So you're both very stoic, I know, but fantastic. It was really good, and just really spoke so well, and both particularly erudite as well. As I said, just a huge thanks. I'm gonna. It's really great to see OCs coming back and listening to them and seeing how well they've done. And hopefully you'll be able to see another few OCs as well at our next. Quite by magic there. Just a quick segue into our next events, which are medical and the law event as well. But in closing, thanks to everyone for attending tonight. Thank you for great questions, really great questions as well, and thanks to Sophie and Ben for facilitating this evening for us. It's been fantastic, and thanks to my colleagues in the development office as well for putting all the things together as well. So thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.